Well, let's take a little shot at see if we can figure out how to record something here. Daytona Beach, Bike Week 2023. As Pat said, grumpy. I don't know if that was a reference to his appearance or his attitude. He looked the part of an ancient dwarf, decked out in faded outlaw colors, leathers, and worn-out boots and jeans. Bent low, he stood about 5'3", but clearly had been closer to my height earlier in life. His face was burnt, and his gray beard shot white. His wrists and hands were large, the backs and knuckles scarred. I suspected he had been quite formidable in his day, a do-rag tied around his head. I said I knew a couple outlaws in Chattanooga in my youth. One of them gave me this crooked nose. Things did not end well for them. He squinted and said, "Humph." Then I asked, "You from Chattanooga?" "Yeah, I grew up there. I live in Texas now. How about you?" "Knoxville," he answered. "Oh, were you an outlaw when the Knox County detectives blew up the compound in the 1970s? With a hint of suspicion, he asked, "How do you know about that?" "I was living there then. I used to play poker with one of the detectives who claimed to have led the bombing. You know, no one was ever charged with that. And, well, the statute of limitations long since run out." He squinted again and repeated, "Humph, it's hotter than hell. I gotta find some shade." "You own your bike?" I asked. He said, "Yeah, parked down by the pavilion." "There's cover down there." We slowly started walking silently in that direction, a half a mile along the speedway. He was breathing a little raspy and walked with a cross between a limp and a shuffle. As we passed the Kawasaki tent, he turned and spit, grunting in disgust. "Rice burners." I kind of smiled a little. We finally reached the HD demo tents and pavilion. I figured that was where we were headed. These guys would never ride anything but a Harley. I asked what he rode, and he said a 62 Panhead. I thought, well, if the bike is close by, I'd like to see it. We shuffled on over to a few palms and the speedway. His bike was a vintage chopper. Wow, I haven't seen any vintage bikes since I got here. He spit again and said, "Humph, these kids like this new crap. I can't afford any of this shit." I asked if he would ever sell it. He responded only if he could no longer ride or was dead. I said, "Well, I guess if you're dead, you can no longer ride." He laughed for the first time and asked how old I was. I told him 72. He said he was 75. Asked if I'd been in Vietnam. I said, "No, you?" He said, "Yeah, 2 tours in the Marine Corps." We talked for another half an hour or so as the sun set. I said I needed to go, and it'd been good talking with him. He looked out the side of his eyes and said, "You're pretty smart." I said, "What do you mean?" "You said you didn't ride." "That's right. I've never been on a bike in my life and probably never will." He shook his head and he said for the umpteenth time, "Humph. If I'd have never got on one of the damn things, I'd probably be walking as straight up as you." "Well, the only reason I'm walking straight up is 18 inches of titanium rods in my spine, and, well, you know, alcohol and fast cars can get you just as bad as a bike." "Huh, reckon so," he answered. "Well, Grumpy, you be careful going back to Knoxville here. I'll see you around. Been nice talking with you." I turned, walking toward the International Speedway Boulevard crosswalk back to my hotel. I heard the roar of his bike starting up behind me. As he passed, an ancient dwarf outlaw biker on a hog, he gave it a little goose and nodded his head. I gave him a brief smile and waved back. Well, there's nothing quite like the sound of a panhead. Before I reached the street, I heard the deafening roar of accelerating bikes and a cacophony of sirens. Then a sound like a small explosion. Kawoof. I knew that sound well. A collision. By the time I could clear the hedge and see the intersection of half a dozen Volusia County and Daytona Beach cop cars were blocking the street. Dozens of motorcycles, trucks, and cars were already backing up behind the obstacle. As I got a little closer, I could see a couple of cops sitting on a biker on the ground. One of them was trying to cuff him. I asked a bystander what happened. He answered, a half dozen bikes were being chased by the cops. When they get here, this asshole turns around, shoots them in the bird. Turns back just in time to T-bone a super truck crossing the intersection. As the cops pulled the biker to his feet, it was clear his leg was injured. Despite the injury, he had jumped up and tried to run off before the cops tackled him. I guess adrenaline will do that for you, and he was hollering loudly that they were hurting his leg. The cop responded, well, if you don't want to hurt leg, I guess you won't run next time. The biker whined, there were all these blue lights behind me. What was I supposed to do? The cop shook his head, saying, I suppose an intelligent man would think, maybe I should stop and find out what all these lights and sirens are about. The biker said, you think this is funny? The cop jerked on the cuffs and said, no, I don't think this is funny. I think it's effing stupid, and you're an effing idiot. That ended the discussion, and they threw him in the back of the ambulance. They had just arrived, and I turned and headed back to my room. I have to say, though, that although I'm not a motorcycle enthusiast, my accidental visit at Bike Creek was rather eventful and entertaining. Now, if I can just figure out how to get rid of all these motorcycle advertisements on my Facebook news feed. Thank you.